So we'll get started now. So nice to be here with all of you. This is week 2 of our 7-week class, Buddhist Studies course on the Noble Eightfold Path. And this is the Buddha's articulation of, really it's not the first step, it's, the getting clear about the path is something that develops over time. So we're going to do a guided meditation to begin. And for those of you who are new to the Buddhist Studies programs, we always do this, usually do one chant or another, but usually the chant we do is this slow version of the Three Refuges. And you can take a look at the chat box, and I pasted the basic stanza. And then we sing that, chant that 3 times. The second time we add the word dutiyampi, which means for the second time. And the third time through, we use the word tatiyampi, which means for the third time. And we're taking refuge, right? We're singing together, which in itself is a beautiful thing to do, even in this strange online format. But not only that, it's just a chance to bring this heart quality. Oh yeah, I do trust this wakefulness, that's Buddha. Being awake, being intimate with the way it is, that's Dhamma. And I do trust more skillful, more compassionate, more creative and useful responses and actions in life that arise out of the intimacy of Buddha knowing Dhamma, Buddha being intimate with Dhamma the way it is. Good, so let's settle in. I'm in New Jersey. You might notice there's a different setting here. Upstairs in the house of Wynn's brother and sister-in-law here in New Jersey, and where Wynn and I are in New Jersey taking care of Wynn's mother for a week. Wynn's staying a little longer. So it's nice to be able to continue teaching even when I'm out of my home. So let's do this chant together. Buddham saranam gacchami, Dhammam saranam gacchami, Sangham saranam gacchami, dutiyampi Buddham saranam gacchami, dutiyampi Dhammam saranam gacchami, dutiyampi Sangham saranam gacchami, tatiyampi Buddham saranam gacchami, tatiyampi Dhammam saranam gacchami, tatiyampi Sangham saranam gacchami. And we settle in to comfortable posture for the meditation time. Maybe take a couple of longer, easy breaths in and out. In the most simple and most essential way, let's turn the heart toward the feeling of belonging here. This sense, this very real sense that we belong here in the body, in this moment. It's not a mistake being alive here and now. And we're not afraid to fully, completely show up to what's real in the body, in the mind, in the heart. And in a non-forced way, but just kind and curious way, just sensing our most sincere, deepest purpose, intention for this life. However it's sensed right now, like deep aspiration to put down the load, or some intuition about real love, unconditional love all around, or a deep wish for healing. But let it be real, not something, not repeating back something you heard, but really interested, checking in with the heart and mind. What deep, sincere intentions can be felt and discerned now, here. It may be about deep aspiration to be honest with ourselves, no longer in any pattern of self-deception. Or just something simple like a deep, wholesome desire to be at ease, to be deeply relaxed and calm. And it's not about judging our aspiration or comparing it, but more about sensing what beautiful, what wholesome intention is actually available. It may not be the predominant, strongest intention right now, but we're willing to be patient and willing to be curious as we just sit, settle in the moment, settle with this experience of embodiment. What is this heart truly, deeply interested in? What is the deepest aspiration for this life? What does a heart really, sincerely wish for? And tonight, this week, as we're reflecting, thinking about, studying intention, then let's do our best for this meditation period. creatively to keep this deeper, sincere intention, aspiration in mind, to not forget it. Now remember, this isn't something we're constructing. Instead, it's really something we've uncovered, or something that is here that we're feeling and tuning into. This wholesome desire to be at ease, to be free, to be released or happy, or whatever it might be. Can we keep that deep intention, beautiful intention in mind? And of course, in moments we'll get swept away by more superficial intentions, the intention to scratch my face, the intention for this sit to be over. All kinds of relatively superficial intentions will arise because they have momentum. The habit could be strong. And so the habit will express itself because of its strength, its momentum. And that's okay, it's to be expected. And the practice then is finding our way back to what feels to us to be a very wholesome, sincere, resonant intention, even if it's quite subtle. But when we connect with it, it feels really right or in alignment with our deepest understanding. And we strengthen that wholesome intention by keeping it in mind, not forgetting it. And finally, don't feel you have to put the intention into words. It might only be a felt sense of a desire or wholesome wish. So the meditation again is to be interested in a very simple and sincere way with the heart's most sincere, wholesome, deep wish for this life. Let it be very real and earthy, not something contrived. What does the heart really want now? And then just doing your best creatively, simply to keep it in mind. To, in a sense, be living out of that beautiful intention one moment at a time. Being connected to that wholesome intention. Feeling it, being it, Let it be the meditation object. And of course, the mind is likely to be swept away by other intentions at times. The intention to worry, the intention to plan, the intention to want something or to be irritated by something. So when you notice those, the mind getting swept away into other agendas, other doings, then notice what that sets in motion. For example, the body and the mind getting tight. In the same way, notice when you're able to keep these, the more wholesome, beautiful intention in mind. Notice what that sets in motion. And as the Buddha says, we're, in a very real sense, we're creating the world that we experience based on what intentions the heart is centering around. It really matters what intention the mind, the heart is connecting with. If this practice feels tight, then of course relax. It's much more about a deep curiosity about what the heart really wants, deeply wants. In this case, what's subtle is more significant than a more gross, literal answer to the question. For example, a deep longing, deep aspiration, deep intuition that the load can be put down. That real peace and freedom right here is a possibility. Some taste, some flavor of release, even with conditions as they are. Or the intention, the wholesome desire not to struggle, not to hate, not to condemn anything or anyone. Or the beautiful wish not to be afraid, to be able to do what needs to be done, say what needs to be said. So this kind of practice really is a way of encouraging or giving permission to the heart to aspire to what the heart considers most beautiful, most free, most good, whatever that might be in any moment. Why not in this moment aim the heart toward what is truly good and healing and beautiful by keeping it in mind? It's really impactful to consider, as the Buddha teaches, that intention really matters. So what does the heart really aspire, really wish to intend, to aim toward? So when you feel ready, slowly opening the eyes if they've been closed, and staying right here in the moment in the body, but begin to adjust as you need to. Even do a little stretching if that would be helpful. And again, it's really nice to be with everybody tonight. Week 2 of our 7-week course, Buddhist Studies course from Common Ground Meditation Center, of course, on the Noble Eightfold Path as it's described in the early Buddhist tradition. These 8 spokes: right view. Remember, the word right or sama just means the full, or the what is in alignment with the truth, the complete, authentic view, intention, right? There are 8 of these. So the wisdom category is view and intention. The sila, moral area of morality, has to do with right or complete, wise action, speech, and livelihood. Those are the next 3. And then the last 3 have to do with samadhi, the kind of unification, the coming together or stability of the heart. And that involves wise effort, wise mindfulness, wise concentration. So tonight we're talking about, last week, I mostly spoke about this initial wise view, the first limb of this Eightfold Path, and about wisdom, the wisdom part. And I talked about it in the basic initial foundational expression of wisdom is we human beings realize that this moment really matters, and how my heart is connecting and relating and showing up in the moment really matters. Because how the heart's relating, in a sense, in a very real sense, lays something down, leaves an impression, so that who I am in the next moment is in part what was laid down in the previous moments. Who we are right now, how we're living, how we're perceiving, how we're relating, is really the expression of all of those previous impressions that have been laid down. And this is the so-called mind stream, heart stream, right? And it's just the cumulative impressions of previous moments of mind, previous heart moments, where there was the sensitive heart, the knowing heart, meeting the whatever the experience was in that previous moment, including how the mind was understanding and relating. And so that impact, that impression of how the mind is relating, the impression, the little impact, we call the karmic impact. So when we talk about karma, we're talking about actions, like even the action of a thought, or the action of me saying something, or the action of me doing something in the world, some deed, some activity, right? It's the part of the mind that is motivated, intending to think, to speak, to do. It's that the quality of that intention that affects, leaves an impression on the heart. And that's really what I want to talk about tonight. And I'm going to say just a little now about the the small groups that we have every other week. I mentioned this last week. So during week 2, which is tonight, week 4 in 2 weeks, week 6 in 4 weeks out, well, you save the last 25 minutes for small group works. Now, when we're online, this is an optional activity. Just join in. I believe Michelle is here assisting tonight on technology, and Michelle will put in the live chat as we get a little closer to 8:30 the link for the Zoom group. And then you can just click on that link when we're done about 8:35 tonight. And then you can join in with 3 other people and discuss what I'm about to share. But I just want to say it's totally optional. But if you're not going to do the group, then at home, and I'll send out an email tonight with the discussion theme that the small groups would do, then try to find somebody at home in the next week to have this conversation with. And if that just doesn't make sense in your life, then just do the reflection on your own. Just find 20 minutes or so, give or take, and really keep these questions, this theme in mind. So what's the theme? Well, related to intention is this developing wisdom where the heart, wisdom in the heart, begins to discern the skillfulness and unskillfulness of particular intentions. Like I was saying a moment ago, intention isn't neutral. It matters. Like what we were trying to do tonight in the guided meditation is really uncover as best we could our most pure, most beautiful, most universal, most trustworthy intentions, aspirations, inclinations, right? And then to keep it in mind and keep it in mind and keep it in mind. And there we are, we're meditating, but out of that most wholesome intention, or one of the more wholesome intentions. And what does that set in motion for us when we're keeping wholesome intentions in mind? And then, we'll get sucked back into more superficial, less wholesome, sometimes even very unwholesome intentions, like the intention to hate ourselves because we think we're bad at meditation. And we might be in that vortex for 2 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever. And then as soon as mindful awareness comes back online, we notice we've been in that negative or unwholesome vortex. Well, what did that set in motion? What, like the felt sense of the impressions that have been laid down in the heart mind stream, how do I sense that karmic result of having been caught up in that intention to hate myself, or to hate my teacher, or hate the practice, or there's almost an infinite number of ways to be negative, in the sense of laying down heavy negative impressions on the heart, on the mind, or heart and mind stream, because it's an unfolding. Like everything in nature, including our mind, it comes and goes. But this heart and mind comes and goes lawfully, conditionally. Each mind, each moment of mind is conditioning the next. And so how I'm relating conditions the next moment of mind. And so if I'm relating, showing up with a lot of aversion, a lot of fear, a lot of disconnection, numbness, well, that conditions the next moment. So by making the effort to keep a wholesome intention in mind, we set something else in motion. And then over time, what develops in our heart is what we call in English conscience. Like we have a conscience. We sense whether how I'm doing, whether it's wholesome or not, whether I'm planting seeds for more suffering or planting seeds for more happiness and more release. And as I've mentioned over and over again, this is such an important teaching from the Buddha about hiri ottappa, the sort of wholesome regret and wholesome concern. This sensitivity, having studied how I'm relating and what that sets in motion, and what ways of relating are relatively wholesome, relatively unwholesome, then this conscience, this intuition, this sensitivity, this like moral sensitivity begins to develop, so that if I'm relating in a really unskillful way, then I'll feel some regret, like, I'm pretty sure that didn't help anybody, myself especially. Being the way I was, relating the way I was relating, whatever I was caught up with that last hour. Now I feel the karmic implications, the impressions that have been left in this heart stream. And I have regret, like, oh, that didn't help. What I laid down over that last hour, that doesn't help anybody. And there would be then a very appropriate and healthy regret. Basically, this compassionate voice, honey, don't do that again. Please, this isn't helping. Or concern, like if I'm in the vicinity of getting drawn into one of those unhelpful vortexes where the qualities of mind are negative, then that wisdom we call hiri-ottappa, that intuition, that conscience, will say something like, you sure? You sure this is going to be helpful? You sure this is going to deliver the happiness that on the surface seems exciting, seems juicy, but are you sure? Is this skillful? I mean, just imagine if in every moment of our life, a very stable, kind, respected voice of conscience would arise, not in a pushy way, not in a judgmental way. Are you sure? Are you sure you want to think this thought? Are you sure you want to say these words? Are you sure you want to do this act? And it would be the other way. Are you sure you don't want to think that thought? Are you sure you don't want to say what you're inclined to say? Are you sure you don't want to do what you're inclined to do? So it's not favoring non-action over action. It just is inserting this conscience that is really an active expression, a very enlivened expression of compassion. Of course, I'm going to be concerned. Of course, I'm going to feel regret. So the theme, like in the small groups tonight, and I'll talk more and by 8:35, but whether you do it tonight in the small groups on Zoom that Michelle will help set up, or you just do it at home over the next week with yourself or with some Dharma friend, some trusted friend that you feel like would be interested in a conversation like this, but just to reflect on, like, how do you actually experience your conscience? And like use real examples. When recently, I mean, could be from long ago, but it's nice if it's recent. When recently have I noticed that voice, that intuition, like, ooh, I'm not so sure this is right. It's like an internal cue telling us that we're about to do something that may not be helpful for myself or for others, that might cause some problems. And what is that experience? What is it as an energetic, or even in terms of sensations? What is it in terms of mental activity? And then once you have some examples of your sort of inner voice, sometimes people call this the quiet voice, or the quiet voice of intuition or conscience. Like, where are those places in our life where we tend to ignore, and we've actually gotten pretty good at ignoring? Like, there's some rationale that just pops up that, in a sense, defeats that quiet, steady voice of conscience. Like, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. Oh, it's not that big of a deal. I'm going to do it anyway. So it's just really good to just acknowledge the usefulness, the functionality of conscience. We would be really screwed if we didn't have that living wisdom, that earthy living wisdom that in English we call conscience. Buddhism, we call it wholesome concern, wholesome regret, or hiri-ottappa. The Buddha called it the guardians of the world. So, and I'll write that, I wrote it up and I'll send that email out right when we're done tonight. So for those of you who opt out of the small groups or don't opt in, then you can just find another time. And of course, the people who do the small groups, it'd be great to have that conversation many times over the next week with yourself and with others, if that makes sense. So I just want to review kind of the way that we're going to be talking about the path, this noble eightfold path, as it's called. Remember, noble, I know it's kind of a funny word. We think about it in terms of aristocrats and monarchs and things like that. But noble really means what would be the most useful purpose for this life, for human existence. And living in a way that alleviates the suffering in this heart and contributes to the alleviation of suffering for others. Living a life that's truly a gift toward oneself and others, right? That would be a noble life. And getting on that path, that noble path, starts with it matters. And part of this is just recognizing that our mind, our heart, the habit energies in our mind and heart can be our worst enemy. More destructive than anybody out there can be our own inclinations. And the habits of our mind can be our best friend. And so that's why, from this initial point of view, we often say, and I remember Ajahn Sumedho makes this point a lot. He's a Western Buddhist monk, one of the respected elders in our greater early Buddhist tradition, here in the West especially. Ajahn Sumedho used to say a lot that we're not here to follow the mind, follow the habits of the mind, which is that kind of new agey statement we hear, and there's some truth to it. Like, no, just let things be okay with the way it is. Well, if I've got a lot of hateful habits of mind, if I'm have a lot of habit energy about being disconnected and thinking it's not my responsibility, well, I'm not so sure I want to follow those tendencies in my mind. Instead, he says we're here to train the mind. But the training isn't so much being hateful about our negative habits. It's about noticing when there are negative habits there, doing what they do. Notice what that sets in motion. Let it break our heart open. Oh yeah, this is not helpful. And when wholesome, when we aim the mind, when we are interested in a better way, like what might be a more wholesome way to relate to this moment, to show up, and we uncover a more wholesome way, then we want to notice that. Like, notice how healing it is. Notice how it leads onward toward a greater sense of ease and relaxation in the heart, in the mind, and in the body, and even around us. The calm, the ease, self-compassion we feel turns out to be an invitation and a gift for those around us. Just like being hateful turns out to be a problem for those around us too. We can't help but, in this interdependent way, where we all belong to each other, like it or not, it really matters how we're showing up, not just to ourselves. So we're here to train the heart. And one of the first ways we hear about this, the whole vibe of the Buddha's teachings is this vibe of renunciation. And this is, gets some pushback in our heart, like, I'm not so sure I want to renounce. But remember, the Buddha's just talking about renouncing, letting go of the causes of suffering. I think most of us would be in favor of letting go of what actually, authentically causes this heart and other hearts to hurt. So we're learning how to renounce, to let go of planting seeds of suffering, and we're learning how instead to plant seeds of happiness and release and deeper healing. So that shouldn't really scare us in any way. We're not rejecting, renunciation isn't about rejecting the world or rejecting responsibilities. We're just rejecting planting seeds of suffering. So, to kind of give it a more practical example, a kind of superficial example, but ice cream, which is something that I like the flavor of. And so this sort of general orientation around renunciation, the Buddha isn't saying you should renounce ice cream or whatever. You can just substitute in whatever you like, as much as we need to renounce when we see what the cause of suffering is, that my mind is dependent on having ice cream, and I suffer when I don't have the flavor, don't have the quality of ice cream I've grown accustomed to, and then I suffer. And when I do have ice cream that I like and grown accustomed to, then I expect it to make me happy. And when that happiness doesn't last as long as I really want it to last, then I feel a little or a lot betrayed by it. And I think, well, maybe I need a second helping. Maybe that will do it. And then when that doesn't really do it, then I feel definitely betrayed by it, and I got a stomachache. Oh, here I went again, and it didn't deliver. I mean, it was good for a while. So what we're renouncing in this simple example of somebody who likes this particular sense experience of eating ice cream is the mind's delusion about thinking that that sense experience, that pleasant sense experience, is more than what it is. That has to be abandoned. Ice cream is ice cream. The sweetness, the coolness, the smoothness, and all the other aspects of that sense experience, it's just what it is when one knows it moment by moment. It's not more and it's not less. So the root of suffering isn't whether we eat or don't eat ice cream. It's all about how the mind relates to it. The quality of motivation, intention, when I'm either eating the ice cream or avoiding the ice cream, because of course, someone can create just as much suffering avoiding ice cream as they can eating ice cream, right? Because we can generate and act out unwholesome intentions, the intentions that cause the heart to get bound up and heavy in any experience whatsoever. So the root of suffering ends up not having much to do with the particulars of the experience as much as it has to do with the way the mind is relating. And this is why intention is has such an important place in the Buddhist teachings. So I want to share, and I'm going to send this discourse from the Buddha out. It's a pretty famous one. The middle length discourse is number 61. Here, Thanissaro Bhikkhu translates the title as Instructions to Rahula at Mango Stone. So Rahula was the Buddha's son, and in the tradition it's thought that Rahula was only 7 years old when the Buddha gave this teaching to his son. And just a little background. So the Buddha, this is probably mostly myth, but we don't really know. And so take it as a story, which means we're responsible for making the story useful for us, as opposed to thinking it's some literal truth that we just hold on that level. But anyway, the Buddha left his partner and son soon after Rahula was born, went off, started practicing. After 6 years, had some profound insights and became a really successful, I guess, teacher in that part of India 2,600 years ago. And he just wandered around, and eventually with a larger and larger group of students, women, men, lay people, but in the early years, relatively small, evidently. And after a couple years or so, he cycled back through the area where he had lived as a younger person. And there, of course, are his relatives, including his son. And his son, his partner, his wife, said, go to that man and collect your inheritance. And so the little boy, Rahula, did that. And the Buddha said, okay, you're going to be a novice monk. And so he left with the Buddha after the Buddha had wandered through that area and continued practicing as a novice until he became an adult and then a monk. But anyway, when Rahula was just 7, the Buddha gave him this teaching. And it's, I think, really potent because it really talks about developing this conscience. this sensitivity to what's helpful and not helpful, not only for ourselves, but for the wider world, right? And so this is how this teaching goes. I'll just sort of talk us through it, but you can read it all the way through, because if you're on the email list, you'll get this copy of this sutta, this discourse tonight. So they were practicing near Rajagaha, a town, a city, small city, where a lot of the stories of the Buddha took place, in a place called the Bamboo Grove, at the squirrels' feeding ground. And later in the day, the Buddha went to see Rahula, and as was the custom, where the junior people would wash the feet of the senior people, having, especially the Buddha had walked to him barefoot, and he'd wash his feet, they'd sit down, and then Rahula was ready for a teaching, and with the water dipper and the pitcher of water, the Buddha poured out some of the water, and he said to Rahula, the little boy, you notice how much water is missing? And Rahula said, yeah, I see it. And the Buddha said, just so. Somebody who is willing to tell a lie, right? They're going to be missing something. And he just kept, then he threw whatever remained in the little dipper away. You see how the dipper is empty? Just so. The heart, the capacity to be a real spiritual seeker is empty like this dipper, if they're willing to rationalize telling a lie. He turned the dipper all the way over. He had Rahula really contemplate this sort of simple image of something is really missing. And just to make this point that how we act, how we think, how we speak, what we do, it really matters. You can't really live this life that I'm pointing out if you think that unskillful actions don't have consequences. Everything matters. He's basically, the Buddha's teaching him in this really simplistic way. And then he goes a little later, in the same way, Rahula, when anyone feels no shame, no regret in telling a deliberate lie, there is no unskillful thing, I tell you, that they cannot do. Thus, Rahula, you should train yourself. I will not tell a deliberate lie, even in jest. Well, that sort of hits home, because a lot of us, myself included, I've been conditioned, I'm in the habit of using sarcasm and joking around, and this little teaching always comes to mind. I haven't overcome all those habits, but when I'm sensitive, when I'm reflective, when I'm mindful, it doesn't feel quite right, even in jest, to be joking around. Because, and especially these times where truth is really, or mistruths are really used as a kind of weapon and a way to act out greed and hate, it's just such a powerful thing to be around somebody who's deeply respectful and really full of care in how they speak and the kind of words and what they say and what they don't say. And it isn't about being passive, right? Because those people who are full of care in how they speak, when they do speak up, their words have a real power, because people know this person is careful. They wouldn't be saying that if they didn't have a lot of confidence that these words are true. And the Buddha didn't stop there. He says, what do you think, Rahula? What is a mirror for? And the little boy responded, for reflection, sir. In the same way, Rahula, bodily actions, verbal actions, mental actions are to be done with repeated reflection. And then he went in this very systematic way, as sort of the custom, so that it's really clear what the Buddha is saying. And this is this sensitivity to how we're relating and what we're setting in motion, to karma, or to the potency of intention. So basically the Buddha says, whenever you want to do a bodily action, whenever you're doing a bodily action, whenever you just finish doing a bodily action, so before, during, and after every action of the body, every action of speech, and every action of thought. So for all three of those ways of acting, some bodily deed, some speaking deed, some internal thinking deed, before we think, while we're thinking, after we think, the Buddha suggests that we should be reflecting like a mirror. We should be mindfully aware, and in particular, mindfully aware in this sort of intuitive sense, what kind of impression is being left in my heart. When I'm about to think something, I am thinking something, I just thought something. I'm about to say something, I am saying something, I just said something. I'm about to do something, I am doing something, I just did something. What impression? Is it planting seeds, causing suffering for me and for others, for both, or not? And if it is setting in motion suffering, then we should, as the Buddha says here, if it would be an unskillful bodily, verbal, mental action with painful consequences, painful results, then that is unfit for you to do. But if upon reflection you see that it doesn't cause anybody, you or another, harm, then it's skillful and has pleasant results, like in the direction of release, of an inner happiness, maybe outer happiness too. And that's fit for you to do. Or if you've already done it, it should be the cause for sort of a beautiful feeling like we have when we've been reflective and realized what we just thought or what we just said or what we just did was wholesome. Oh yeah, that feels, whatever got laid down, that feels good. So in this sense, what the Buddha is saying is we want, more than anything really, we want to be a student of our own heart and what's getting laid down or what's been laid down. We want to read it, we want to sense it, we really want it to be our guardian, our teacher, because it isn't that someone else can tell us whether we're being skillful or not. We can fool other people. They might think we're the best thing in the world, so skillful, so kind, so wise, so generous. But inside, it may not feel that way because the heart knows. We can't, when we've cultivated this sensitivity to these karmic impressions, what's getting laid down. And I'm not talking about anything mysterious. It's just the feeling tone, the quality of the heart before, during, and after any moment's experience, verbal, mental, or just bodily action. Oh yeah, this is what's left over, or this is what is arising as I even contemplate thinking this, saying this, doing this. So kind of makes you wish when we were 7 years old, a wise person had given us a powerful teaching like that. And we have a little bit of time before we break into small groups. And I just want to, with that example of contentment and generosity and letting go, which is, other ways, different ways of talking about this deep, powerful, beautiful intention of renunciation. So we've got pointing out instructions. We don't just have to read our heart. We can read our heart knowing that the Buddha said, what beautiful intentions, like qualities of mind that are going to leave a really good impression in the heart, the quality of renunciation, which you could call contentment, generosity, non-stinginess, right? Content with the way it is. Instead of I could be discontent with being 62 years old. And then the question is relating with discontent about my age. What does that set in motion? Or I could practice being content with being 62, like the function I still have in my body, you know, the eyesight I still have instead of the eyesight I've lost. And the interesting, it's not about, we think that something like contentment is dependent on what I have. Well, I could be content, but I'd need this and that, and then I'd be content. But it's actually much more of a choice, like what we choose to pay attention to and how we choose to keep that quality of contentedness in mind versus, by habit usually, keeping the quality of discontentment or stinginess or craving in mind. And the same thing with metta. It says, oh yeah, it'd be easy to have a lot of loving kindness if I was around kind people and fun people. But I'm around a bunch of people I don't like. So how can I have metta? But it's much more of a choice to be friendly, to be kind, to be loving, no matter the kind of people we're around, right? There's a way to be friendly, even when, like, sometimes we can be friendly and say, and I don't think I can be around you right now, but I don't hate you. I'm not going to throw you out of my heart. I'm just going to create some space between you and me because I don't feel safe around you, or I can't handle you, or whatever it might be. So that choice to be kind, that choice to be content, that choice to not harm, that's made for pragmatic reasons. It's not really so much, I know it matters, the sort of particular circumstances of our lives, but whatever the particular circumstances are, the pragmatic reality is it still matters what kind of intention we're watering by paying attention to it. We always have the incentive to be drawing on living out of wholesome intentions, the kind of intentions that lead to release, and to abandon the intentions, the motivations that lead to suffering for ourselves and for others, because it matters. So I'm going to leave it here. So I see that Michelle, so nice to have you here, Michelle, helping us out. She's put the link and given you some instructions. Remember, this is an optional time to be part of a group of 3 folks. Remember, this is a little bit of sacred space. The 3 of you will gather in that little Zoom room. You have as much time as you have, about 25 minutes. Each person gets 3 minutes to speak. Then the rest of the time that remains, you can just have an open conversation. It's sort of nice if someone keeps track of the time, so everyone gets their 3 minutes. Even if they run out, the other 2 people really hold that silent space, and that person who's speaking just continue to reflect on the question. What is your experience of your conscience? How has it been supportive? Where have you overridden it? Just your own direct experience, what comes to mind. We keep what comes up in these small groups private to the small group. It's nice to say your names. And in this more intimate setting, it's really helpful to share your pronouns so we're not guessing people's genders and misgendering them. So take a moment, just say, what pronouns you like to use. And then if you choose not to be in the group, just find a time to do the reflection at home by yourself or with another person. So we're really doing the same study. And there will be some additional readings that I'm sending out tonight too. So then this is the time to say goodbye for me, but you'll see Michelle has the link there and the little instructions, and just the key is to hang in there, and Michelle will make sure everybody gets in a group who clicks on that Zoom link. So I hope to see everyone next week for week 3, and have a nice small group for those staying in the small groups. Otherwise, see everybody next Monday evening.